isotopical ratio, samarium-neodymium ratio, and we can deduce the times, but these two parameters are not independently characterized. Okay, so each time I take a time, I have one samarium-neodymium ratio, so they are coupled. So short-lived isotope system. So what it is? So it's still radioactivity, but the parent nuclide has has a fast half-life, and is completely decaying on geological timescales. So in general, we assume that if the half-life is less than 200 million years, then it's an extinct nuclide. All right. So there are two groups of short-lived isotope system. There are those whose stocks of parent nuclide is refilled permanently during the Earth's history, like the most famous carbon 14, okay, which is used for dating bones and stuff like that. And these are produced in the atmosphere by interaction with cosmic rays and solar wind. And the second groups they are not very useful for constructing Earth history, early Earth history. Those that we are going to use for looking at the ADN are those whose parent nuclide was initially present in the solar system, but quickly decayed after. Okay, they are not present anymore. If you try to measure them today, you're never gonna find them. They are way below. But there is still a bit because it's an exponential law, so you never have no parent nuclide anymore. But it's so small that it will never be detectable. Maybe in 1 billion years, who knows? So yes, these are called extinct nuclide. So you have hafnium-182, samarium-146, iodine-129, aluminium-226, iron-60. You have many of them. Okay, so after 5 of these their half-lives, they have completely disappeared from the solar system. So this is just a summary of the different short-lived extinct nuclide that has been discovered so far. There is many that have time scale half-lives that are too short compared to the differentiation time scale for planetary mantle, so they are not very useful for our purpose. The one I'm going to talk about have longer half-life. The two I'm going to talk about, the one of today will be samarium-neodymium short-lived system with an half-life of 100 million years, and the short-lived isotope system hafnium-tungsten, which has an half-life of 9 million years, so much shorter. So the samarium-146, neodymium-142 short-lived isotope system. So you have 146 that decay to 142 neodymium with an emission of helium nucleus. Again, the half-life of 100 million years. So, as I say, the father, 146 samarium, was initially present in the solar system, but after 500 million years, later, sorry for the mistake, 500 million years later, it has completely disappeared from the solar system. So this means that the radiogenic daughter, 142 neodymium, is only produced during this narrow time window between the start of the solar system and 4 billion years. All right? Okay, until now. Okay, so this is a schematic draw of the evolution of neodymium isotopic ratio, the 143 and the 142. So you can see that the 142 neodymium ratio will be changed during the first 500 million years, okay, during the life of 146 samarium. But after 500 million years, it's not changing any longer. Okay, so it will only register things that are happening between 4 and 4.5 and the start of the solar system. So this is completely different from 143. So it evolves slow, the evolution is slower than 142 because the half-life is longer. But then the half-life is so long that you continue to evolve, 143, 144 continue to evolve until today. And it's still evolving right now. Okay, but the problem is that for using this, we need to know how much of 146 samarium there was initially in the solar system. But we can measure how much, we cannot measure how much samarium neodymium there is today. So this is a complication of this system. So how does shortly lived system work? So I take again the example of the samarium neodymium system. So the number of 142 neodymium 142 nucleus in the system at the time t equal the number of nucleus you have initially plus the number of nucleus that has been produced by radioactive decay. Okay. So and this radiogenic component is only produced during the from the start of the solar system to 4 billion years. Okay. Okay, so what is that? In fact, it's just the number of parent nuclide that was present initially in the system, minus the number of parent isotopes that are present at today. Okay, but this we cannot know. All right, so we're gonna replace that by this using the decay radioactive law I showed you yesterday. So the phasor at the time t is equal the number of nucleus of samarium 146 present at the time t equal the number of nucleus initially present at the start of the solar system times the exponential of lambda t, of minus lambda t. Alright, so we rearrange that, we get the number of nuclei of 142 at the time t equals the number of nucleus initially present in the system plus the number of phasors that was initially present in the system, so at the start of the solar system, the number of nucleus of samarium 146 that were there, and still this factor which depends on the time. And so after, as yesterday, we normalize to a stable isotopes of neodymium, 144 neodymium, and we get this equation. So I think I don't need to describe that, that's easy to understand. So just to show you that after 5, if the time t is long enough, 5 half-life, okay, then you get lambda t that go to infinity, okay, and so this term go to equal 1, all right? And so you get at the end this equation. So the ratio that you measure today, this is the ratio at the start of the solar system. Okay, this is the ratio of the phasor, an isotopic ratio of the phasor at the start of the solar system still, and this is the samarium neodymium ratio, a chemical ratio of today. Okay, so this can be measured, and these are two unknowns. So again, we have a kind of isochrone. We have an isochrone equation. Y here will be x, and then this is the slope. So the isotopic composition of the daughter of the parent at the start of the solar system will correspond to the slope of the isochrone. And the intercept of the isochrone with the y-axis will give us the composition of neodymium at the start of the solar system. So the thing is that we have an isochrone, but then we need something which is old enough in order that at the time it formed, there was still 146 present in the system. Okay, if there was no 146 present in the system at the time of the meteorite, at the time of the samples we are looking at, wow, I'm making. So you need to take old samples that are crystallized or formed during the time of when 146 samarium was still alive. Is that clear? So this is an example of an internal isochrone. So realized on eucrites. So do you know what eucrites is? Do I need to? No, you don't know. So Euclid, it's a meteorite. It's coming. It's coming from a differentiated planetesimal. So planetesimals that are differentiated into a core, a mantle, and a crust. Okay, and eucrites are sampling either the mantle or the crust of this planetesimal. All right. So in general, at least with basaltic eucrites, there is two types of eucrites. There is basaltic eucrites, which likely represent the crust, and cumulate eucrites that more likely represent mantle cumulates. But when you look at basaltic eucrites, at least they are quickly cooled. Okay, and this is important because after we need to. It's a bit complicated, but you need that the samples you are looking at is quickly cooled, in order that it's for anchoring your short-lived isotope system to a long-lived isotope system, because it's really complicated. Sorry, you don't need to understand that for the rest of the talk. This is an internal isochrone, but for 140. What? Why do you? Because they are not quickly cooled. Why I'm not using chondrites here? It's big. From my point of view, I mean, chondrites cooled quite quickly, relatively slow. So the problem is that, yeah, I need to explain that because after it's going to be. So each of the systems we are looking at, when you are doing internal isochrones, have different temperature of closure. Okay, so if I make, so this is different system, and this will temperature of closure. You have the hafnium tungsten system here, which is one of the highest temperature of closure, and lead. Maybe I should put. It's really rough number because they could change depending of the mineralogy of the samples you are looking at. So when you do an internal isochrone with lead or hafnium tungsten, you never, if the sample is cooling slowly, you will not get the same age, because the tungsten will record cooling below 100 degrees, whereas lead system is recording cooling below 600 degrees. All right. And the problem is that with short-lived isotope system, you don't have absolute age. What you determine with hafnium tungsten system is a relative age. So the slope of an isochrone is this ratio, right? This ratio is unknown. But if I have two meteorites with different slope, okay, then you can directly see that this is just a function of time. Okay, this decays with time as a function of exponential of minus lambda t. All right. So when you get two slopes, I should not plot because this is 143. This is 142. So for example, I get I take one CAI, for instance. I get a slope like that. Then I have my eucrites. I get a slope which is like that. And what I need for getting a time is to calculate the difference between those. And I will get a difference of time between the crystallization of the CAIs and the crystallization of the cumulate eucrites. Is that okay? Samarium isotopic composition, but that's quite clear, so that's okay. And so we just can calculate the difference of time. So if you want to anchor that in our history, what you need is to have an absolute age for CAIs or for this one, and then you can recalculate what is the age of the other. Okay, so CAIs are the age of the solar system. This is the Binda isochrone. Okay, I calculate the difference of time between CIs and the cumulative and Eucrites. All right, and then I take the lead age, absolute age of CIs, and I recalculate what the absolute age of Eucrites is. So we need to anchor the hafnium tungsten stuff to an absolute age, and this absolute age in general it's lead. Alright? So if you have a quickly cooled material, then you will induce a difference of age. You will not record the same event, in fact, not the same. And yeah. Is that clear? Yeah, because yeah. I mean, this is. I mean, so when you take a basaltic Eucrites, it's like a lava, so it's like it's almost instantaneous crystallization. At least at the scale we are looking at, the time scale we are looking at. So okay, so well, here we. That's why I didn't want to talk about that, because here, in fact, when you look at neodymium isotopes, first, and you do internal isochrone, you can do an internal isochrone on 143, and in the same time produce an isochrone on 142. So this is the same. The data has been obtained with the same measurements, and so you have here you can derive an absolute age with a long-lived system, so like the lead, it's the same idea. So this is age t, corresponding time to T0 here. Alright? T0 is the formation of Binda. It's not the start of the solar system here. Okay, the isochrone slope is the composition of samarium, isotopic composition of samarium at the time of the formation of Binda. So this is the isotopic composition at the age determined by your long-lived isotope system. So sometimes here there is no. The good things when you do that is that you don't have to take care. This is because Binda is a cumulative Eucrite, so it's cooling less slowly than a basaltic Eucrite, but it's still working because here what they take is neodymium data versus neodymium data. So the closure temperature is the same. Okay. So now that you know what is the isotopic composition at this age, you can directly recalculate what it was at the start of the solar system, and then you get your initial samarium isotopic composition. And this has been done by Audrey Bouvier in 2010. So this is all the different samples she has measured with 143 and 142, and she combined all the slope she's getting from them, and then she extrapolates to get the initial abundances of 146 within the solar system at the start. So this is evidence that 146 was present initially at the start of the solar system. I could have should have taken some other data. I could have taken the data of CAIs, and then we have directly the initial. So we have also data for CAIs, and they plot at the same point. And so, so back to neodymium. Back to neodymium isotopic evolution through times. Okay. So I'm gonna show you how we can infer what is the evolution of 142 neodymium in the chondritic reservoir. So that means in the bulk silicators, because they are both refractory and they are both lithophile, strictly. So whatever the equation are, we finish with this, okay? And you can draw. So this is the composition of 142 as a function of the age, and you can draw these curves. So this is the composition of chondrite measured today. All right. We know the 140. Whoop, blah, blah, blah. No, that's all what I have to say here. Yeah, so we know the composition. Yeah, we know we have the measured isotopic composition of SURE today, which is the isotopic composition of the SURE 4.5 at 4 billion years, and with knowing the initial isotopic composition of samarium at the start of the solar system, we can draw these curves back here, okay, and then determine what the initial composition of the solar system is. Okay. So all the lava that will derive from the Earth mantles are, because the Earth mantle is supposed to be chondritic, should follow this evolution line, and today should be measured here. So this is what is expected, at least. But yes, so this is the first measurement of really precise measurement of 142 that were realized, in fact, and that has been possible due to development of new techniques and also to the improvement of TIMS instrument. So you know what is a TIMS? So it's thermal ionization mass spectrometer. So the idea is you have a little filament, you put your samples on, your purified samples on the filament, you pass a current through the filament, this ionized your samples, and then the ions are accelerated in an electric field, and then they are deviated as a function of their mass in a magnetic field, and then they are collected as depending on their trajectory inside the spectrometer, and that you can measure isotope ratio. And so recently, I mean, in the year 2000, Thermo has produced a really high quality machine that allow to reach really incredible precision. So the precision of this measurement are about 5 ppm, and that was never reachable before. So the first to show chondrites measurement and versus terrestrial samples measurement of has been Maude Boyer and Carlson in 2005, and what they show is that terrestrial samples and chondrites, which are here, have very different composition, and this is not what we were expecting. This is not what we expect. We expect to find the modern samples here. So here, terrestrial samples should be expected to be there. And they show, so I have to redescribe the epsilon 142 neodymium. So 142 neodymium is like yesterday, so it's the ratio within a sample divided by the ratio in the standard -1 times 10,000. So this epsilon is just the deviation of this ratio relative to the standard, which is representative of the modern, of the accessible mantle today, in part per 10,000, and sometimes we also talk in mu, because then you get ppm units, and ppm units is really convenient because you see 5 ppm, 20 is better than 0.2, so it's just for simplicity that we use this notation, but they represent just deviation of the ratio relative to the modern mantle. So everything which has lower 142 neodymium, epsilon 142 neodymium lower than 1 will have a deficit of 142 neodymium relative to the modern mantle, and everything which has 142 an epsilon which is positive will have an excess of 142 neodymium relative to the modern mantle. Okay, so the main things to retain is that the terrestrial rocks, the modern terrestrial rocks, show an excess of 142 neodymium of about 20 ppm relative to chondrites. So how can we explain this? So at some point, You need to go out of the evolution of chondrites. You need to go. So this is terrestrial samples. They are more radiogenic than the chondrites. So what it means is that at some point, the mantle source from where they are deriving should have a SMND, a chemical ratio, which is higher than the chemical ratio of chondrites. C'est bon? It's clear? Okay. So the problem is that what is the kind of which early process can be responsible of this early SMND fractionation? So this fractionation should occur for sure when 146 was alive. If it's occurring here, there is no more 146 alive, and then you end up here. So this event has to occur between the start of the solar system and 4 billion years. So what kind of processes can produce this fractionation? So first, I should not have started with core formation because it's a bit crazy. So it's a bit of a crazy idea, but there are some people that try to put some neodymium to try to see if neodymium could enter the core under a specific condition of pressure, temperature, and oxygen fugacity, such that core formation will induce samarium neodymium fractionation. And then you end up with a bulk mantle with superchondritic SMND, and donc higher than chondrites, and a core with subchondritic SMND. Donc, so they make some experimental studies to look at these problems, and these studies confirm that it's not possible to put neither samarium, you cannot fractionate samarium and neodymium within the Earth, with the core formation. So this is the log of the d value between metal liquid and silicate melt, okay, for samarium and neodymium as a function of the sulfur content. And what is interesting to see, so the data for samarium are in red, and the data for neodymium in black, and you can see that the red dot and the black square are exactly the same. So the partition coefficients of neodymium and samarium are the same, whatever the conditions are. Okay, so you cannot fractionate samarium from neodymium simply by core formation. So this early event is not core formation. So then, for sure, people have suggested that it's and the first author, Maud Boyer and Carlson, proposed that this early samarium neodymium fractionation was due to early mantle differentiation, and this is because when you do crystallization or melting within the Earth mantles, you will fractionate samarium and neodymium because they don't have the same incompatibility. All right, so you end up, when you do a magmatic process, you end up with reservoir depleted in incompatible elements with higher SMND ratios than chondrites, and enriched reservoir which is enriched in incompatible elements with lower SMND ratios than chondrites. So if this fractionation occurs during the lifetime of 146 neodymium, then this difference that you generate, so the higher SMND in the depleted reservoir, will translate into an excess of 142 neodymium. So what it means is that that's what it will mean, is that most of the samples that are sampling the samples today and through the Earth history, in fact, are coming from depleted reservoir and not from the bulk mantle. The problem of this model is that the corollary of this scenario is that there must be a complementary reservoir which is enriched in incompatible elements, and this is what I show with this green line, green curve. Okay, and so today you should have reservoirs that have deficit in 142 neodymium, deficit relative to chondrites. C'est important. But so far, no terrestrial sample that has been analyzed have shown this kind of deficit. So lower 142 neodymium ratio, 142-144 neodymium ratio than chondrites. So there is two options. Either you keep this enriched reservoir hidden at the base of the mantle, and that was the first proposition made by Boyer and Carlson, or you lost this reservoir into space, maybe by collisional erosion during accretion. So it's a bit too ad hoc explanation. So I don't find something, it's gone, or it's hidden. That's not completely satisfactory. Oops. What? That's coming. What do you mean by new? A large impact with more Samarian. Yeah, but in terms of budget, yeah, because it's a mantle, so it's not like when you do late accretion and you bring siderophile into something which is depleted in siderophile. The mantle is full of rare earth elements compared to chondrite. Difference of concentration are not that big. It's not going to change your. Yeah. 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 But that has never been, as far as I know, from my point of view, it's a problem with the concentration, and I never saw. No, because there is, in fact, so these solutions are not satisfactory, but there is a good reason for that, because it's not the it's not the reason why we have this excess 142 excess. So this is why I put that. In fact, 142 excess of terrestrial samples is not radiogenic, but reflects nucleosynthetic variations. I don't like this term at all. So what is nucleosynthetic variation? So there are several refractory elements that show difference in their isotopic composition between the different objects of the solar system. So if you look at Mars, chondrites, or Earth, they will have different isotopic composition. But these different isotopic composition are not produced by radioactive decay and neither by cosmogenic effects. I mean, how do you know that? That's a really good question. How do you know that? You know that from here, okay? So this is the barium isotopic composition reported for a series of different meteorites. All right, and this will be the ratio on 143 of. So this is different isotopes. Okay, and here is the ratio of these isotopes relative to another mass, but I don't know which one. But this is ratios. It's not abundances. So. I mean, you can see that all these ratios are a bit yes, but this is normal. This is fractionation correction. So I will need to look back at the paper, but this is really not important for our purpose. So the idea is that when you look at that, you get this kind of crazy diagrams with a lot of variations that are a bit going up and down. And after, you can try to model how these different isotopes are produced within supernova and so on. All right, and then you can draw a profile of what is expected from R process excess or P process excess and stuff like that. And usually it's fitting quite nicely what the observed variation for the different isotopes. And after, how do you know? I mean, it's quite easy. I mean, for radioactive decay, I mean, most of them are known, so you know more or less what. For chromium, you know which one, and you know it's 53 is radiogenic, but 54 is not. And so if you see a variation in 54, this is not due to radioactive decay. Cosmogenic effects are related to the cross section of your nucleus. Okay, so if you have a variation in an isotope which has a small cross section, so which is not supposed to be affected by cosmogenic effect, then What I don't know. Okay, so these variations are commonly attributed to the presence of presolar grains uh, in the solar nebula, and these presolar components, are formed in AGB star or in supernova and have an exotic isotopic composition relative to the average of the solar system. All right. So we have variation that make difference of isotopic composition between the Earth, Mars, and meteorites, and these variations are neither due to radiogenic and cosmogenic effect. And what is crazy is that, so 10 years after we discover this excess of 142 neodymium in the Earth, people were starting to look at what nucleosynthetic variation were looking like for neodymium. And they show that this nucleosynthetic isotopic variation exists in neodymium, and this is shown here. And this nucleosynthetic effect will translate into correlation between the different isotopes ratio. Okay, so you don't expect to have correlation between 142, 144, and 145, 144. There is no reason it's correlated. Why it's correlated? It's because this nucleosynthetic variation translates into correlation in a binary diagram like that. Okay, I won't enter why they are making correlation in this kind of diagram, but just remember that nucleosynthetic translate into covariations in the different isotope ratio of neodymium. So what it means is that 142, 144 is the one we are looking in the Earth, right? And it's varying depending on the object we are looking at. So this is a better insight into 142 neodymium against 148 neodymium. So this is a correlation defined by your meteorites due to nucleosynthetic variation, and this is the composition of the Earth's mantle today. And you see that this correlation is passing through, more or less, maybe a little bit below, but almost through the composition of the Earth's mantle, which means that the difference between this and this, so this is the 20 ppm difference. This is the one I was showing before. Sorry, on this axis. It's a little bit more because, I mean, chondrites are here, all right? So you have a 20 ppm difference between the Earth and chondrites. And this difference is mainly explained by nucleosynthetic variation. So, on our diagram, what it means? It means just that the initial isotopic composition of the Earth and of chondrites were a little bit different. And after, you evolve with the chondritic samarium neodymium ratio, all right? And so this little difference that was present initially, you end up with it also at the end, because the both evolution have the same SMND. Okay? So you don't need to have a bulk mantle with higher SMND than chondrites. So what you can say is that there is no need for an hidden reservoir or less mantle reservoir. The excess of terrestrial samples today relative to chondrites is simply radiogenic. It's simply nucleosynthetic and not radiogenic. So you cannot derive any constraint on Earth differentiation using this data. No, that's not the end, but that was a problem that has made busy geochemists for 15 years. I think now it's almost over. But we know I can show you that even if we don't know where we are starting, we can get constraints later. Huh? But it's true, from this data, we cannot say anything on Earth differentiation. Yeah. Because I mean, when you have presolar component, they have really crazy isotopic composition because they have seen a lot of flux of neutrons and stuff like that. Okay, so they have really crazy composition, and after, even they are so crazy that even if you dilute it in the solar system, you still find small variation at the bulk scale, at the bulk object scale. Yeah, so. So why talking so long about 140? Ah. To maintain. Yes, but it's a bulk heterogeneity. So the entire Earth is different from the entire chondrite. So yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't really understand what your problem is, but in fact, so for me, what you say is true, and that why do you need an explanation how to preserve them? When they are there, and you keep them all along the story. I mean, if you accrete a body with a defined isotopic composition, then the composition of the body will not change anymore. So there was heterogeneity initially in the solar system, okay, depending of what is your feeding zone, okay. You don't accrete exactly the same materials. There are some materials where there are more presolar grains, and some portion of the solar disk where there is less solar grains, so you will induce differences between the bodies. No, I'm not answering your question, I guess. Hmm. Yeah, that's for sure. There is mixing, but it's not completely homogeneous. It has to be. You have to keep some degrees of heterogeneities. That's I mean, cannot explain why, but this is to people doing simulation about solar systems that have to explain why we have heterogeneities, and this is, I mean, I have I cannot tell you more because this is a constraint. This is a constraint that you have to apply in your modeling. So preserve, yeah, this heterogeneities. So yeah, it's really strange that 142 didn't record any depletion if 143 is recording depletion, as I show you earlier yesterday, that I show you yesterday. But in fact, there are 142 neodymium evidence that the Earth mantles differentiate during the ADN. And we're going to see that directly. And it came just after the discovery of Maud Boyer and Carlson in 2002. It was in 2003. Guillaume Caro first revealed 142 neodymium variation in terrestrial rocks. Yes. So he find, you see, so he analyzed samples from Ishua, which are 3.8 billion years old, and they found that they have a small excess of 142 neodymium of about 15 ppm relative to the terrestrial standard and to the samples derived from the convective mantle, compared to MORB. So it means that the Ishua mantle source must have acquired a higher SMND than the bulk mantle during the lifetime of 146 samarium. Is that okay? Okay, but in the same time, you have also 143 data on the Ishua samples. You derive an isochrone, okay? The isochrone gives you the age, 3.8, and you can also derive the initial isotopic composition of Ishua samples. So this will be the composition of their mantle source at the times at 3.8 billion years. Okay, and this value is in fact also higher than the value of the isotopic composition of chondrites. So you have both. You have radiogenic value of 142 neodymium, and you have radiogenic value of 143 neodymium. So it seems that both long-lived and short-lived systems indicate they both indicate a mantle source depleted in incompatible elements with high SMND ratio. So now we're going to make the assumption that the both systems record the same early samarium neodymium fractionation. Okay, that they both record the same depletion event. So here it's the evolution of 142. Okay, this is the measured composition of Ischua. This is our MORB, our accessible mantle today. And so you see that for getting higher value of 142, you need to differentiate to make early mantle differentiation during the 500 million years after the start of the solar system. And the effect on 143 here. So still, sorry, I mean, this is the same time. Just it was harder to make nice. So this is the time TD here. It's not the same time scale, but it's the same time, all right? No, it's. I mean, I didn't put any scales. It's just a drawing. I do just the time window. Yes, yes. This is before. This is before 4, and this is before 4 also. It's just this is the same. It's just my drawing is bad. So I could have drawn this. I should have drawn this line, but I don't know why I didn't do it. So it's just a coin. So that makes everything confusing. But this is. I mean, it should be here, and the line should be like that. All right. Exactly. Yes. This is because I make a larger scale, because if not, it's so huge. Okay, now I understand why I did that. Okay. Then now I'm getting confused.
I'm used to give lectures with somebody else.
Yeah, so you see, it's not easier when you make your own slide and your own graph.
Huh? We can exchange photos. I can teach yours and you can
Why not? We can try that.
That would be
great. Okay, so now that we have this coupled data, 142 and 143, can now be used to estimate one samarium neodymium source and the age of depletion. Okay, we have two equations. So from that you can you have the equation of this evolution, you have the equation of this evolution. You can determine these data points, which will depend of the samarium neodymium ratio and the time of differentiation. Same here. So you have two equations and two unknowns. So you can solve it. And this is shown by this diagram. So here, it's a bit a complicated diagram. I think I'm gonna, wow. I'm much longer with short-lived than with long-lived now. It's shorter half-life, but longer time for explaining. Yes. So, this is epsilon 142 times 100. So this is mu, in fact. This is epsilon 143. So what are these curves? So this is our parental reservoir, okay? And this curve shows the isotopic evolution of a depleted source, which is coming from this reservoir, okay, as a function of age. So depending of the age of differentiation I assume, so if I assume a very early depletion I will be here. If I then I go down, if the depletion occurs only at 4.4, I will be here. So I will have an isotopic composition of about 50 ppm more radiogenic than bulk silicators or chondrites. And I will have an epsilon 143, which is 5 units more radiogenic than the BC, the bulk silicators. And so I can do that. This is one evolution line for a depleted source with a defined SMND of 0.255. And this is for what we get for different SMND ratio. All right? And so now we can plot our data for Ishua. So 142 of about 15 ppm higher than bulk silicators. 143, which is about 2 epsilon units are more radiogenic than bulk silicators. And what you end up with is that you can derive the SMND ratio of the Ishua mantle source, which is about 0.215, and also you can derive a time of differentiation, and here it will be between 4.5 and 4.45. All right. So now we have an independent measure of the isotopic ratio by coupling 142 and 143. We can independently determine the SMND ratio and the 140 and the edge of depletion. So here it's clear that this mantle source must have derived from a portion of the mantle that has been depleted in incompatible element really early during the Archean, around 4.4. So this is the evidence that we have early differentiation from 142 neodymium. But maybe just a little bit is that, yeah. But the situation is not always that nice, and because here, I mean, what we had, oops, no, oh la la. No, what we had before. So Ishua, we have a positive. So I'm talking in anomalies. So we have our anomalies. Anomalies is something that derives from what should be the Earth mantle today. So we have a positive anomalies here of 15 ppm and a positive anomalies in 143. All right. So that you can explain with the same event. But the problem is that when you analyze other rocks, it's not always the case. So here it's the examples of the 3.5 Skepenburg comatite. Okay, they show a mantle source which has an excess of 143 and a deficit of 142. Okay, this is shown here. So this is a modern mantle. You have a deficit of 142 and you have an excess of 143. And you have also an excess of 176. All right. So how do you explain that? If you make an early differentiation, then you generate an enriched reservoir. Okay. And this, so yeah, for explaining this decoupling, so this excess versus this deficit, you need at least 2 differentiation events for explaining this data. So first, you need an early enrichment at before 146 samarium is extinct. Okay, so this enrichment will generate a reservoir with lower SMND than the bulk silicate earth, so that will drive your composition down. All right, so this is the first stage, and for 143 the same. Same for hafnium tungsten, lutetium hafnium. Inverted. Sorry, it's a bit complicated here. No. Well, forget about that because I'm not sure about this part. I didn't check it because it's all models that I so maybe there's something wrong here. But don't worry, just take care about this. And then you need a second event, which this time is a depletion, so that will bring your SMND ratio to higher values, higher than BSE, but this should occur after 146 is extinct in order not to affect the 142 neodymium. So here we assume it's around 4, and you still have a little effect of this enrichment. But the effect of enrichment is huge for 143, and then you end up with decoupled 143 and 142 data for a single rock. So I would say in Ishua we have been lucky in a way, because there seems there have been no decoupling, but the problem is that we cannot, here we assume it's a single event, but maybe there has been two events, but two events in the same direction, and that you cannot say from, you cannot see that from here. But whatever, you still need to have something happening between 0 and 4 billion years. I think I'm gonna stop here. What is next? Oh my gosh. There is still plenty of... yes, I mean, you can clearly see, I mean, this is the plot, the same plot I show for Ishua. Because this is a depolted reservoir, but there is a complementary reservoir with negative anomalies, okay, that are down there. And this is what is shown here. So this is the BSE. So this part is the enriched reservoir. All this part is the depolted reservoir. And when I plot my Skeppenburg data points, it's plotting in the impossible, how do you call that, the zone where you cannot go. No-go zone. Ah, yes, no-go zone. Like in Paris. Okay. That will be over for today because the rest is quite complicated again. That's because I don't. No, I will have plenty of time tomorrow to come back to. Yeah. No. No, this is something completely different with the idea of this hidden reservoir, and it doesn't need to be the entire mantle. You can just have a small portion of the mantle, which is the... Yeah, it could be. It could. I mean, when if you look at all the data we have now, it doesn't look like it's. I mean, I can show you the. This is a compilation of 142. So this is a compilation of all 142 neodymium, at least in 2013. So this is the same plot as for 143, and you can see that the signature. So initially there was a lot of heterogeneities, at least a lot of anomalies, and it seems that these anomalies are going down with time. So when you look at Rizzo paper and Carlson ideas, they still keep their ideas of a global differentiation event here that will generate a highly enriched mantle here and a depolted mantle here, and these both will be remixed through times and end up back to the bulk mantle. Because we find, I mean, we have found evidence that we have a complementary reservoir from this reservoir, because we have found we have found negative anomalies in Skeppenburg, as I just showed, and Annika has found negative anomalies in the Greenland Amerallectites. So there are negative anomalies, but they are still above chondrites. Okay, so it's less than 20. So chondrites will be here. Okay, because it's important. If we had something there, we are back in the problem of before. I think we have the same. I mean, apparently it's looking like a global effect, but I think we don't have enough data yet. I mean, already with 143, it was looking a bit messy. At the moment, we have just like it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 locations where we have anomalies. So, and from that you deduce the entire story of the Earth. So, I mean, at this step, I would say we don't know. We don't know if it's a global event or something much more just concerning a portion of the mantle. If you ask to Carlson, he will tell you it's a global differentiation event, I guess. It's registered.
the whole night.